Southern Oregon Normal and got arrested.
Yeah, I remember that.
Justin represented Lori, and Lori hired me to represent Lee.
I'm Vivian McPeak, and this is Hempresent. If you have feedback or would like to suggest a guest or topic for Hempresent, don't be shy. Email me at hempresent@gmail.com. Portland activist and attorney Leland R. Berger formed Oregon Canna-Business Compliance Counsel in 2013, following 30 years in private practice. A co-drafter of the Oregon Medical Marijuana Act and of Oregon's legislation initiative, Ballot Measure 91, Mr. Berger helped draft dispensary initiatives and lobbied the Oregon Legislature on behalf of patients and their providers. Since legalization, his legislative advocacy is on behalf of all cannabis consumers, and he works statewide to end cannabigotry. Lee's practice includes cannabis-business-related administrative and trial litigation, as well as state cannabis-related criminal defense and appeals. He has received numerous accolades, including being named High Times Freedom Fighter of the Month, NORML's Citizen Activist Award, Oregon Cannabis Industry Association's Lifetime Achievement Award, the Oregon State Bar Cannabis Law Section, Leland R. Berger Lifetime Achievement Award, an award that is named after him, and NORML's Al Horn Lifetime Achievement Award, among others. But don't take my word for it, because he's here with me right now. Welcome, Lee, my fellow High Times Freedom Fighter, to Cannabis Radio.
Thanks, Vivian.
I don't get to say that very often.
There's a lot of us, I think.
Oh, yeah. There are.
I'll have to send more of them your way to be on your show.
I've had a couple. Lee, I have many times told people that if I had everything to do over again, I would have gone to law school to become a lawyer. How did you become interested in law? And at what point in your life did you know that you're going to become an attorney?
Was in my last year of, I grew up back east. I grew up in the northeast part of the country. And when I was in my last year of college, I applied to 5 law schools and then threw all the applications in the trash. I just moved to Washington, D.C., and I worked for the Maryland Action Coalition, gathering signatures and raising funds for to challenge utility rate increases in Maryland. And I was living in Washington, D.C. at the time. And I quit after the summer because it's not much fun collecting signatures. Weather gets cooler. But I was waiting tables, and I started thinking about how these folks, that the people we were raising money for were lawyers, and how it was mostly in English, and I could read English. And I had my grandmother at the time had offered to be a patron for me and on it, and I took her up on the offer, and I came out to Portland, Oregon, because at the time I was interested in being an environmental lawyer. I'm an environmental law lawyer, and I found out that, first of all, the Lewis and Clark here in Portland, the environmental law was focused mostly on anadromous fish, and I wasn't really that interested in them. I was more interested in public power and who decided what kind of energy sources we were using. I mean, this was, I attended the rallies on the mall in Washington, D.C. To end nuclear power, and was worked here in Oregon to shut down the Trojan plant in Rainier, Washington, just across the river, But it also required a really strong science background, which I don't have, and so I found out, this is 1979, how recent it was that the United States Supreme Court had given rights to people in state court charged with crimes, including the right to counsel, and I thought that wasn't likely to get reversed ever, and I got interested in criminal defense law. I didn't get involved really in I started practicing in 1983, and I didn't really get involved in cannabis law reform and the practice of cannabis law, which at the time was all criminal defense,
right,
until the mid-90s.
Speaking of cannabis law, you've been heavily involved in Oregon State's legal cannabis structure. How would you characterize the pot laws in Oregon? Would you classify the current status of cannabis law there as legalization? And if you could, what would you change about the model there?
That's a good question, Vivian. I think that Well, on the one hand, well, for me, I have to say that the driving impetus for cannabis law reform has been to not have to stand next to anybody ever again at sentencing for a plant, and it's a personal self-interest. I just didn't want to do it. I didn't want to be a part of it, and that's what motivated me to try and change the laws here. And initially, following legalization, that was successful. I think that arrests and prosecutions are down. But now, 7 years after we passed the law, or 7 years after it went into effect, Oregon is spending more money arresting and prosecuting people for growing marijuana than we did when it was illegal to grow at all. And they're doing this for a couple of reasons. One reason is the way that and I didn't realize it, frankly, that just what a profound effect it had. That even though we'd abolished state prohibition, that federal prohibition loomed large, and under the Cole memo, the relatively benign exporting of cannabis out of the state from Southern Oregon, particularly, although not only, was something that the state made a priority to try to curtail, or at least expended great resources, and is expending, like I said, more money than before when it was illegal to grow at all. So on the one hand, we have that anomaly where there's I'm still a criminal defense lawyer. I'm still representing people who are arrested and prosecuted for growing, and other things having to do with the unlicensed distribution of cannabis. On the other hand, I was talking to somebody earlier today. I think the fact that I can buy an edible and know how much THC is in it is a good thing, I think, or a topical. The last time I was at Hempfest, I had a bite from a cookie that someone gave me, and I slept for 15 hours. So
yes,
we all have stories like that, I know, and
right.
So those are good. There are good aspects. I appreciate,
of course.
Even though I only grow one plant, I appreciate the ability to grow plants, and I can't believe that, almost 10 years after you guys passed the law, that you still can't grow at all legally there in Washington. So
yeah, that's a big
I don't know.
problem.
It's a mixed bag, to be sure, and there are lots of I like. When I drive to Southern Oregon on a case and I'm heading down there, I like seeing all the, billboards for stores selling weed. So, it's, on the other hand, I was really hopeful that in the same way that you or I could go, Vivian, out to Walla Walla or to Yamhill County here in Oregon and go on a wine tour, tasting tour, and go to farms and have different, taste different wines, that we'd be able to go to weed farms and taste different strains that different growers have been,
right,
have different genetics and everything, and we can't do that. So it's really a mixed bag. There's which is one thing why I am, I haven't spoken with you about this, but I sure am hopeful that we're going to get back to having Hempfest again, because even though we've legalized here in the Pacific Northwest, there's a lot of work left to do, both in Oregon and Washington.
Yeah, that is so true. Nobody's more hopeful than I am, Lee. Speaking of farms, legacy farmers in Northern California are being pretty much wiped out by this legalization model. Some of them prefer to call it commoditization. They're unable to meet the high regulatory and tax requirements and unable to compete with I say, corporately funded big agro-type cannabis grows. Oregon's also home to old school legacy cultivation communities. Some have been there since the late 60s. How are they faring under this current model? Are they also having problems?
I would say it's a mixed bag. And I also have to say, again, the first time I heard the phrase legacy farmers or legacy market, this as opposed to black market or underground market was when I
Right.
was at Hempfest, and I heard a speaker say that, and it's a wonderful and accurate phrase. In Oregon, it goes back. There are these communities in Southern Oregon that were intentionally formed in the late 1960s by people who found San Francisco in the late 1960s too confining. So it's 3 generations of people who've been growing. And one of the great joys of my practice is being able to license not just legacy growers, but legacy extractors and processors and legacy wholesalers and retail distributors, and take people out from the legacy market into the legal market. And yeah, there are these barriers to entry, but and I have certainly represented or worked with publicly traded corporations, but for the most part, the people that I work with are mom and pop operations. Mm-hmm. For the most part, it's the ones that I really enjoy working with are the people who were doing it before it was legal to do so, and now don't have to look over their shoulder, when they're doing it. I mean, that was the point, right? Mm-hmm. And but I understand about what you're talking about in California, and I hear what you're saying about, again, I think it's a mixed bag in mm-hmm. Southern Oregon, as best I can tell from living in Northern Oregon and just having to travel down there for work once in a while. In fact, during the pandemic, I've been appearing in court, down there by video or by phone for the most part. So I traveled down there, I want to say a month ago for the first time in 2 years. So actually, and I went to court in December for the first time in 2 years. I physically went to court. So it's been a tough ride. The pandemic, it's been really isolating. I've had some personal tragedies, and it's been hard, man. So,
is that the truth, man? I feel you on that one.
I'm looking forward to the end of it, and so yeah, but it's definitely a mixed bag. There are people who are just doing what they were doing and flying under the radar. There's people who are doing what they're doing and getting caught and facing reduced consequences than there were before, less severe consequences than there were before. And to be honest and fair about it, I mean, the other reason there's piles of money pouring in down there for enforcement is that there's a lot of violence associated with a lot of the large-scale so-called cartel grows, and there really is violence. There really are farm workers that aren't being treated well. There really are farmers who don't give a shit about the environment and are using pesticides and stealing water during the worst droughts in thousands of years and stuff. So it's it's not all just legacy farmers growing 50 plants.
Yeah, and even a couple of people who've disappeared under weird circumstances because of the clandestine nature of some of the grows that are still going on down there in the cannabis breadbasket. I'm speaking to attorney Lee Berger. We're going to take a quick break, come back with our second segment, so stick with us.
Time to roll out for the people that let us Hempresent. Hang loose. We're coming right back.
We're back with Lee Berger. Lee, you represent a lot of cannabis dispensaries or cultivation licensees who are threatened with revocation by the Oregon Health Authority. Yeah. What kinds of alleged violations result in the threat of having one's license revoked? What kind of things are you defending against?
Well, Viv, we're down to actually only one licensed medical marijuana dispensary. And when there were 240 something, and the rest are all retail stores under the Oregon Liquor, and now it's the Liquor and Cannabis Commission instead. And the kinds of things that the OLCC threatens to cancel license for really principally are diversion ones. I represented a store on the South Coast that shipped CBD products, but it shipped them, to California. and they lost their license. There was a store here in Portland where there was just ongoing kind of mismanagement, and which included employee thefts and not paying attention to stuff. It's a highly regulated industry, and I'd say the most difficult to run from a regulatory standpoint are the stores. Actually, they're the ones that have the most rules and the ones where the rules are changing the most frequently. The good news in Oregon is that the Oregon Liquor and Cannabis Commission has been responsive to industry concerns about being overzealous, and that we're starting to see things like fix-it tickets, where they send out a notice and it says you're in violation for doing this, correct it in 2 weeks, or we're going to proceed to more formal proceedings, kind of stuff. And I think nationally, although I hear in Washington from our friend Mitzi that there's still issues with the LCB up there about the antagonism between the regulatory agency and the folks. But in Oregon, I think they're pretty responsive to industry. They certainly try to. They hold rules advisory committees that include not just lawyers but lots of industry participants, and it's a big. It took them a while to realize that we're not criminals, that we want to be regular business people too, and once they understood that, they listened. I mean, it's still. For example, you can walk into a liquor store and buy a bottle of something that would kill a child, and walk out with it in a paper bag, and you still need child-proof packaging and
for cannabis buds,
bags for extracts here. So it's we're not there yet, but we're getting closer to to that kind of a regulatory thing. They've been really responsive about concerns about for consumers, particularly about the vaping issue came up. I was involved with the rulemaking on that, and it's a tough balance because other industries don't. Nobody requires Coca-Cola to disclose what's in its recipe, but they want to know every ingredient of what you're adding back into the extracts, and it's creates some challenges for trade secrets and other stuff. I mean, one of the things that I didn't know anything about before I transitioned towards legalized cannabis was the significance of intellectual property and the importance that and local control. I didn't know anything about municipal law and how in criminal law, in Oregon, if there's a state law, it trumps the local law. In civil law, it has to expressly say that only the legislature or the people acting as the legislature can decide this, or else it does not trump. Just the idea that I had no idea that the counties and cities would opt out, for example, or that would even be an option. It certainly isn't anything we wrote into the initiative. So one of the disappointments is that the legislature announced that the people didn't know what they were doing, and they rewrote the initiative. So in many ways. But again, one of the big surprises was how powerful the local cities and counties are, and that's true too on the enforcement end of it. It's really a lot of the funding for enforcement in Southern Oregon has to do with the fact that the counties aren't getting any more of the timber money from the feds, and the locals regularly vote down public safety tax levies to fund the police. So they need the funding for the police just really to have police funding,
Right. Lee, in my state of Washington, when our legalization initiative I-502 was passed, medical cannabis patients lost a lot of ground. Eventually, they had their plant and possession counts greatly reduced, with dispensaries that were really like community support centers replaced by these recreational pot stores that feel more like an all-business 7-Eleven of weed rather than compassion-based dispensaries. Has that kind of trade-off, I think you kind of mentioned that that's happened since you only have one left in Oregon. Is there anything that we can do to address the needs of the patients that have really, it seems like they've been kicked under the cannabis in this model?
Yeah, no, that's true. It's the good news is that there are activists that are working on that. Principally, well, not by himself, but one person is Anthony Taylor, is the chair of the Oregon Cannabis Commission, and he's also a co-founder and lobbyist for Compassionate Oregon, which is kind of the voice for patients in the legislature. There are people doing things, legislatively on behalf of patients. In my practice, what I've been working on a little bit is, the nursing board posted online that if you were a nurse, you couldn't advise a patient about the therapeutic value of medical cannabis because you weren't protected by the Oregon Medical Marijuana Act, and that's a complete misreading of the act and what the law is. I mean, the law is clear that, patients have a right to hear that information, and medical professionals have a right to speak it under the First Amendment. So I wrote the Attorney General responsible for the Oregon State Nursing Board and told her that, and they took it down. I'm working with, there's a nurse in Medford named Jana Champagne who's working, I know, on an issue. There was a bill that passed in California, and actually the guy who promoted it, I think his son was in hospice actually in Seattle when he was unable to get his son cannabis, and to have cannabis in hospice care was a bill that passed through the Legislative Assembly in California, and then Newsom didn't sign it, and then it passed through again, and he did. And I know Jana and others are working on that bill up here. I know that Anthony and a group of people, including Dr. Rachel Knox, are working on a comprehensive medical bill for next session, and I agreed to help with drafting it once they figure out the ideas. I don't have the patience anymore to sit through those lengthy meetings. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yep. I mean, there's a lot of unique issues that medical cannabis patients have that aren't addressed by the recreational stores that really are kind of just their whole goal is high THC rather than specific strains that cancer or epilepsy patients might need or something like that. So,
we don't have actually. It's not as restrictive as that, really. I know that in Washington State, it's a rule that you can't. I mean, I can and have gone to an Oregon store and said, I have a friend visiting. She's looking for a vape pen. She prefers sativas, but she has, a condition in her lungs that creates a problem. Do you have something that won't irritate that? And I can ask that kind of question.
And you can't even mention medical in Washington State here, so it's a lot different. We do got to go to the next break. I'm still talking to Leland Berger, attorney out of Portland, Oregon, and we're going to come back with our final questions. So stick with us.
Time to roll out for the people that let us Hempresent. Hang loose. We're coming right back.
Back to the final segment with Lee Berger. Lee, you've inspired a lot of other folks. In a recent write-up about you in the Oregon State Bar Bulletin under Profiles in the Law, Justin Rosas described you as, quote, a fierce advocate who manages to say everything in an understated tone that makes DAs, judges, and jurors follow his lead toward mercy and justice. And he also said, Lee Berger was the first lawyer ever to convince me that I could be totally myself and still be an amazing lawyer. What lawyers inspired you? Who have you drawn instruction and inspiration from that has impacted the way that you approach your practice?
One lawyer who's been inspiring over the years is our friend Jeff Steinborn. He's just a terrific model of the importance of maintaining yourself. Being not being afraid to be yourself, and at the same time, recognizing that is. The hard part about practicing law, Vivian, I think, is finding the balance between being intellectually detached and being emotionally involved. If you're too emotionally involved, you're not effective. And if you're too intellectually detached, then what's the point? You might as well be. Right. So I would say if I had to, mention a lawyer who was
strikes the balance.
Inspiring to me, it would be Jeff. Yeah.
Jeff Steinborn.
Yeah.
And he's been going through some personal issues, and he's just a great guy. I want to say that Jeff Steinborn was HempFest's absolute first attorney, the first person that stepped forward to represent us. In that same article, Portland lawyer Andrew DeWeese is quoted as saying that you, quote, like the counterculture and that you are a bit of an anti-authoritarian. We have a couple minutes left. Do you like the counterculture? And if so, why?
Well,
you and I are counterculture. Is that accurate?
Well, there's that. There's no denying,
Ico, my brother.
I don't know. I know it's only rock and roll, but I like it. What can you say about that? I like to wear. I don't like wearing lawyer clothes. I like wearing tie-dye and just other pretty things, eye candy for other folks. I just enjoy that. Mm-hmm. I haven't cut my hair in a long time, and I don't know. I'm just comfortable.
And that's part of the being yourself part. That's that being yourself stuff, right?
Yeah, that's your being yourself stuff. Again, I have, particularly early on in my career, Irv Steinbach was a judge who told me that he says, you just wear your heart on your sleeve, and it's, impeding your ability to, we all see it, but it's impeding your ability to be persuasive. So
right.
You really have to it's like our brother Doug Hyatt. I love Doug.
I was just about going to mention Doug. But
you can't go around fuck you to everybody about everything, even though you're righteously pissed about it, even though you're right, and you're right to be pissed about it. It just becomes less effective just to,
I have to say that Douglas Hyatt has dropped a few F-bombs on this very show. Portland activist and attorney Lee R. Berger, as always, my friend, it's been a sincere pleasure talking with you. Thanks for being on the show, man.
Oh, well, thanks for having me, Vivian. Best of luck to you with it.
My pleasure. That concludes this installment of Hempresent on Cannabis Radio. When it comes to prohibition, you've got the right not to remain silent. The Hempresent intro music is 7 Mile Beach from Joanne Rand, and the outro music is Take Back the Plant by Stickerbush. See you next week, folks. Stay strong.
Marijuana.
The opinions expressed on this cannabisradio.com program are those of the guests and hosts and do not necessarily reflect those of the staff and management of cannabisradio.com. Any rebroadcast, republication, or retransmission of this program without proper consent is prohibited.